Hey everybody, Nolan from 4Player Network here. You know what this list is, it's my top 10 games of 2015. Number 10 on my list is Lara Croft GO. Most people probably wouldn't put this in their top 10, but they probably haven't played it, or Hitman Go for that matter. And speaking of Hitman Go, if you haven't played that game, you probably should. It's amazing. Lara Croft GO has so many great puzzles. This is exactly what we were missing from the Tomb Raider reboot. Tombs and puzzles, and this has it. The puzzles start out really simple and they're kind of easy to understand, but they get super challenging by the end of the game. Unlike Hitman Go, where you would move around the level and you could move back and forth and try and figure out solutions, Lara Croft Go puzzles, they really only have one solution for the most part, and it can rack your brain trying to solve them. There's also a lot going on in the background, moving elements and creatures and waterfalls. It adds a lot to the atmosphere, as well as collectibles that you can get to unlock new outfits. The final area in the game has a boss fight that rivals some of the best boss fights from this year. It was astounding, and you just have to play it to understand it. And then you have the DLC that they released for free. Oh my god, talk about hard, it was ridiculous. They ramped up the difficulty like crazy. Enemies that regenerate after you defeated them, more complex puzzles that are even harder in the base game, and you just stare at them and you're like, why am I not getting this? They added a new element in the DLC, which I hope I see in further games from them. You do backtracking. It's kind of an area when you enter through a door, and you can go multiple paths, but they're blocked by certain things, and so you can only go down one path, and once you get down that path, you get an item that, you'll end up going back to the first area and opening a new door, or, getting a torch that will let you back, push a snake back so you can now get to another area. I really hope they implement that in future games. Square Enix Montreal has really impressed me with what they've done with both Hitman Go and Lara Croft GO, and I'm really excited to see what they do in the future. This is the Guild of Dungeoneering. On our quest we're never veering, oh, to be a Dungeoneer. Swimming in pools of gold. That's right! The Guild of Dungeoneering is the number 9 game on my list for 2015. It might come as a shock to some people. It's even kind of a shock to me. I first saw this game at PAX South, didn't really think much of it. I was kind of confused as to what was going on. I was like, wait, you're an explorer in a dungeon, but you're not the explorer. It's a little weird, but it's a roguelite card game. That's down in its heart. It's a card game, is what it is. You're not the guy in the dungeon. You're the guy weaving the webs, controlling the dungeon, and that's kind of what drew me to it. Roguelite changes every time you play it, which is kind of what gives it a little more fun. Being able to, your deck kind of stays the same to an extent. You build your deck as the game goes on. You get more cards for when you unlock new areas in your guild. You get new cards you can add to your deck to expand your abilities. And then every time you go into battle, depending on the Dungeoneer you bring in, be it a cat burglar, a mime, lots of different classes, that will affect what their starting deck is. And one of the downsides to this game is luck plays a huge factor in it, and it's left me with lots of frustration playing it. There will be times when you'll go off into a dungeon and you'll just get, not to be punny, but you'll get dealt a shitty hand. You'll have bad cards, you'll get enemies that you have to face, and kind of lose. And Dungeoneers die a lot in this game. Like, I don't know how big my graveyard is. I would guess 50, 60 Dungeoneers. But that's okay, they earn gold, which allows you to expand your guild even after they die. The Dungeoneers get replaced and you do it all over again. One of the reasons this made my list is because every time I play this game, I find myself playing it much longer than I want it to be. You know, I'll be like, let me just play Dungeoneering. You know, I'll play it for like an hour. And all of a sudden, 3 hours has gone by. Like, you lose yourself in this game. You're just like, oh, I'm just gonna, just explore one more dungeon, just do one more thing. You know what? Let me try out this class. We're gonna bring in this blessing and see how that goes. And you just lose yourself in this game. And that's one of the reasons I love it so much. SteamWorld Heist is number 8 on my list. This is a game I was really looking forward to. I love SteamWorld Dig, but this time around, instead of an exploration game, we get a turn-based tactics side-scrolling shooter game, which is just in steampunk. Steampunk, you got robots, and they're just like, oh my god. So one of the biggest things I loved about this game is the sound. Just really listen when you play it. The sound of your robots moving around every time they fire their guns, the ricocheting bullets, and the music. So they got, I think the Steam Powered Giraffe was the band that they got to do the music for this game. And every time you go into, like, you're exploring space and you stop off at a bar to maybe see if there's any missions or buy some new weapons, and you hear them in the background, and it sounds just awesome. And then you go off to do the mission, and the maps are procedural randomly generated, so they're slightly different every time. Still the same objectives, just different layout, maybe enemies are coming from a different area. The combat in this game is a whole lot of fun, especially when you have guns with like laser sights on them and you're lining it up to get a good shot, and then you ricochet the bullet off of something, but then you can see the slowdown and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna kill them, but then the bullet just barely misses and it knocks off their hat and you're like, son of a bitch, but then you're like, wait, now I can go pick up that hat and I have a sweet new hat for my character, because there are all these crazy cool hats you can get for them. But one of the problems is, with the characters, you can't see their skill tree. You don't know what skills they're going to gain as they level up. And so I kind of stuck to the few I got at the beginning, not realizing that some of the other characters had cool abilities, like if they killed an enemy, they could take another shot. So I think I missed out a bit, not getting able to experience those other characters through the game. But it's probably one of the best games on the 3DS this year, and probably overlooked. If you got a 3DS, you should definitely check it out. The number 7 slot goes to Ori and the Blind Forest. Not many games can hook me in the first couple of minutes, or get me attached to characters, only to cause events to tug at my heartstrings and... the intro of this game. The first thing you'll notice is the only way to describe this game is just beautiful. Aesthetically, it just looks great. Then you start exploring the world, and there's some really interesting areas, there's some contrasting, there's hot and cold and all that stuff. One of the problems with the world itself, though, is this is a Metroidvania game, so sometimes you can't access something because you don't have a certain ability, but the problem is you don't really know what ability you need, or maybe if you can get there. Like, it's not very obvious. Like, take a game like Shadow Complex. That game is very obvious when you don't have the ability. You shine a flashlight at something, it's green. You don't have the green thing. I'll come back later when I have the green thing. But Ori and the Blind Forest left me trying to get to places that maybe I could be able to get, but I'm not sure. And so I maybe wasted a little too much time trying to get that extra power up, because it's just right outside my reach. Speaking of exploring, this game kind of has this weird mechanic where it tells you how much of an area you've explored, and I have some completionist tendencies, so when I see that 96, I'm like, it's so close to 100, I'd want to get to 100. But the problem is, there's a couple of areas that you can't actually go back to once you've left them, and so it's just stuck at 96%, and that's kind of frustrating. While the enemies were pretty cool, I felt that the bosses were a little lackluster. I wish there were more, and maybe a more in-depth boss battles would have been fun. Overall, it's a great Metroidvania with really tight controls and a beautiful design. Alright, number 6. This game just barely missed my top 5. I've always been a fan of the Souls series. Not the best at them, but I play all of them. And Bloodborne, it looked different to me, which is what kind of got me excited. A different era, different setting, different style, the Lovecraftian, kind of London-esque. This change in tone from the previous Souls games is what really drew me to Bloodborne. And Souls games have always been able to instill a fear in me. That, when you're deep into exploration, you have a lot of, blood echoes on you, and you're not sure if there's a new lantern coming up soon, if you should go back and spend all your blood echoes, or you should push through, and you take that extra cautious. In the other Souls games, you'd always have your shield up, but there's no shield in this game, which makes the approach to combat much different. You have to be a lot more aggressive because you can't just stand back with your shield up to defend. Once again, they knocked it out of the park with the enemy design. I mean, who could forget a little crow flopping around on the ground? The boss battles are always memorable. Every time you enter an area where there's a boss, you're always on the edge of your seat, ready for you don't know what, but you're ready. I am a fan of how they changed the multiplayer, and that if you're ever in an area and you hear that bell chiming, you're like, oh crap, I gotta find this bell ringing lady to take her out, otherwise someone's gonna invade my game. I'm not big into the multiplayer of these games, and thankfully I was only invaded a few times, and a couple of times I lost, but those times when you're able to take out the invader, it feels so good. I didn't do a whole lot of co-op in Bloodborne. Mainly the co-op I did was in the Chalice dungeons, which were a really nice addition to the game. A lot of the Chalice dungeons are the same, but they introduced new enemy types and new bosses, some of which were much harder than the main bosses in the game. Never has an enemy made me so angry as to almost break my controller as the watchdog of the old lords. Ugh! But I persevered and I conquered him. That's one of the great things about the Souls games, is if you keep pushing and you keep trying and you hone your skills, you can always overcome all obstacles. Alright, we made it to the top 5. These are the big hitters of 2015, and we're starting them off with Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. Probably one of the most anticipated and controversial games of this year. We would all be ashamed of our words and deeds once we found out the secret to Quiet, and why she revealed so much skin. But I don't think anyone was ashamed once we found out the truth. For some people, it was also one of the biggest disappointments of this year. And I will jump right on that bandwagon and say I was kind of let down by it. We expect a lot from a Hideo Kojima Metal Gear Solid game, especially when it comes to the story. And Metal Gear Solid 5 definitely lacked in the story department. The story beats were really off. It didn't come spread throughout the game. There would be big info dumps here and there, and then a lot of the story all just came at the very end of the game. And some major plot points could only be discovered by listening to cassette tapes. They didn't even do them via codec calls like they used to. Though there were a lot of negative beats, Metal Gear Solid 5 is technically speaking the best Metal Gear game. Some people didn't like that it was open world, but I did. I liked being able to get into a jeep and drive to another mission area, or use your Phantom Cigar to pass time, having D-Dog or Quiet tag along on missions for the extra support, or the extra firepower and speed you got from using D-Walker. Other Metal Gear games were smaller and more compact, and you got to know the environments a little bit better. Even though this one was much bigger, I still enjoyed learning the environments. There were certain towns you go back to, and I remember them. And I loved learning how to kind of outsmart the AI, throw a magazine or have someone cause a distraction. And if you're about to be seen by a guard, you can quickly dive behind cover to avoid being caught. I enjoyed going into reflex mode and taking out 2, 3, or even 4 guards before the alert goes off. Though the launch of the game was plagued with technical issues, Konami making weird changes to the game and locking some single-player elements behind multiplayer walls, and while this is by no means my favorite Metal Gear game, I still had a tremendous amount of fun playing it. And I'm fine with it being the final Metal Gear Solid from Hideo Kojima from Konami. I'll also end with the honest truth that I still think David Hayter would have done a much better job than Kiefer Sutherland. Dying Light. I talked about how Bloodborne, the Souls games can scare me. Never has a game instilled fear in me like Dying Light has. When you get the radio call letting you know night's coming soon, and the whole good night and good luck, and then you hear the sound of nighttime taking over, your watch beeps, and all of a sudden the fucking nightmares come out, and it goes crazy, you're running, you're scared. I don't think I spent too much time out at nighttime in Dying Light for the first 20 hours of the game. I was too afraid to go out at night, because the game literally instilled that much fear in me, which is great. I loved it. Early on, a lot of people poo-pooed this game, mainly because they had a sour taste in their mouth from Dead Island, and I was one of them. I played the game earlier in the year at PAX South, and I was like, you know what? I don't like this game, I don't enjoy it, not gonna play it. Then some other people got a hold of it and they're like, oh, this game has co-op, play with us. I was like, alright, I'll check it out. And wow, it led to one of the best co-op experiences I've ever had in a game. Mainly because the game is less scary when you have someone there to help you out. The parkour in the game is pretty good, probably could have been a little bit better, but you eventually get the hang of it. And there's some pretty cool skill trees. I like that they were based on the more you use it, the more you gain abilities in it. So when you do a lot of free climbing, you gain agility. When you do a lot of, attacking enemies, you gain power skills. The weapon customization was also a lot of fun. I liked adding the fire and the electricity ability, and you had blunt weapons versus cutting weapons. I always got excited when I was opening a chest, just waiting to see what kind of new weapon was inside. And the grappling hook is a game changer in this game. Literally, it completely changes how you play the game. The game also doesn't take itself too seriously. There's a little bit of humor, there's some Easter eggs like a Mario area, and there's an entire elaborate Plants vs. Zombie setup, which is pretty cool. Coming out pretty soon is The Following, which is a big expansion for Dying Light, and I'm super excited for it. They're adding a lot of new elements, and it looks amazing. And if you haven't played Dying Light, definitely check it out before The Following comes out. Number 3 is Fallout 4. I don't think there was a single person who wasn't excited about Fallout 4, especially after the presentation from Todd Howard at the Bethesda E3 showcase. Everyone was going crazy, myself included. The game looked like it was going to be amazing, and then it came out, and a lot of people kind of thought it was just more Fallout. And while yes, it is just more Fallout, I think they made significant improvements to the game, and I just love Fallout, so I'm fine with that. I will say, there were a few things they didn't change, which I wish they would've. I know they're trying to stay in-world, but the Pip-Boy is just not a good UI. There's lots of scrolling, you can't sort things very well, and way too much screen real estate is devoted to the look of the Pip-Boy, not the interface itself. On a positive note, they completely overhauled how you interact with people, and I really like that. No more zoom into a person's face while you're in conversation. Instead, it's more cinematic, and you can even walk around while you're talking to them. They gave companions a big overhaul, and I really like the variety of them and how they interact with you and other people in the world. It's almost Dragon Age-esque in that they have side conversations and your companions will interact with each other and they care about what you do or don't do. Some of my favorite quests in the game were companion quests and getting to know them and their personalities. Plus, this game gave us Deacon, one of my favorite characters of the year. The fact that you can actually meet him earlier in the game, but he's in a disguise and you don't even know it's him, oh my god, it's mind-blowing. I found myself interacting with the base building mechanics more than I thought I would. I know a lot of people didn't like it, and it's not really necessary, you don't have to do it, but there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. Like build up bases for your companions to live in, and set up shops to go to barter with your settlers. I would find myself losing hours and working on my base, not even realizing time had passed. And then they added the crafting system, which is something I really enjoyed. You would find a cool weapon in the world, and then you could go back to your base and upgrade it and make it even more powerful. Also, the new way you interact with power armor was really cool. I like that it actually felt like a suit of armor instead of just, a piece of equipment you would put on. One of the great things about Fallout games, Fallout 4 included, is that there's just so much to do. Even though I've completed the game, and I did it via multiple endings, I'm still constantly finding new things in the world. And not just little things either, like big areas, compounds with people who you interact with. And I just love that these games they don't go on forever, but there's so much for you to do and find and explore that it's just hours and hours of fun. Tales from the Borderlands. This is a game that I did not expect to be in my top 10 this year, let alone my number 2. Mainly because I'm not a big fan of Borderlands. And I know it's a Telltale game, so you don't necessarily have to like the source material to enjoy the game, but I guess I was also kind of coming off a letdown from Minecraft Story Mode. Minecraft Story Mode was a horrible game from Telltale, clearly geared towards younger audiences, and it was a complete money grab. The fact that episodes were coming out mere weeks after each other showed that they didn't spend time on the game. Whereas Tales from the Borderlands, you can tell they put a lot of time and effort into it. All of the characters in the game had a lot of depth and kept me engaged in the story, even though I don't care much for the universe of Borderlands. This time around we have 2 main characters instead of 1. Most Telltale games have you playing the main character and you're kind of interacting through them, but instead now we have 2, and so you get to see the same story happening from 2 different perspectives. And even each person has their own unique interface, so you can really tell who you're interacting as. Most Telltale games usually have a lull in the series somewhere. In the middle, you know, the story's a little less exciting and there's not a whole lot going on. That's not the case in Tales from the Borderlands. I think each episode got better and better as they went on, with the final episode completely just being the best, and oh my god, I wish I could just tell you what happens in that episode, but if you haven't played it, I really want you to, just to experience it. And if you have played it, you know what I'm talking about. You know how great the final episode is. So do yourself a huge favor and pick up this game. It's my number 2 of this year, and it's probably my favorite Telltale game.
Paralysis.
Alright, here it is. My number 1 game of 2015 is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. I was never the biggest fan of The Witcher in the past. I never played the first one, and I think the only reason I played the second one, or at least I started, was because it was a supporter of the month game that they chose. I'm like, oh, I'll check it out. Ended up really liking The Witcher 2. And then the previews for 3 came out, and I was like, wow, 3 looks even better than 2. It looks like it's going to be a great game. And I got it, and I fell in love. To the point where I've actually now read a lot of the books just because I want more from this universe. The world in this game is simply stunning and beautiful to interact with and experience and be in. And I'm no Mike. You know, I didn't turn off everything. You know, Mike always turns off all his HUDs and stuff like that. But I did do some modding to kind of make the game more immersive, and it just really did enhance my experience. One kind of downside with the game is that you don't get any experience for killing any enemy. Any enemy you kill, it's very rare that you get experience from them. Most of the experience in this game comes from quests, and the experience you get is kind of backloaded. Like, you get a lot of it towards the end of the game, and my assumption is they did that to kind of balance it out. Like, they don't want you fighting the final boss and just destroying him, because, you know, he should be powerful. So I understand. But because of that, instead of fighting a lot of enemies, I would just run away, because I'm like, oh, there's no real point in fighting you. But man, oh man, the side quest. There are so many games that have all these kind of filler quests that are kind of, you know, fetchy. That's how Dragon Age Inquisition was. It was you would find a note for some random reason, and the note would tell you to do something, and you'd do it. But it's not like that in The Witcher 3. Every quest you get, you interact with someone. And even if you find a note on a board in a town, once you complete that, you actually go to someone. You're like, hey, I found your note, and I did this quest for you. And they're like, oh, thank you, you know, here's your reward, blah, blah, blah. It feels like there's substance to it. And speaking of substance, did I mention Gwent? Oh, the best card game in any game I've ever played. I spent so much time playing Gwent in this game. I would go and spend hours just searching for people. Like, hey, do you want to play Gwent with me? Hey, do you have any Gwent cards for sale? Just, oh, Gwent is so good. Then there are the characters in the game, and they're some of the best characters in games. And because they use characters that are from the books, they have a lot more depth to them, and you feel like the character is actually well developed. And then they released Hearts of Stone, a great DLC pack with even more characters and more great story to explore and experience. Not to mention the 16 pieces of DLC that they gave to everyone who bought the game. CD Projekt Red knocked it out of the park with The Witcher 3. You can tell that they really care about players and love making games. And those are just a few of the reasons why Witcher 3 is my number 1 game of 2015.
By the end, he could do naught but moan.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my list of the top 10 games from 2015. It's been a crazy year. You're probably thinking, oh, how come this game didn't make it on his list? The thing is, this was a really hard list to make. My 20 through 11 probably could have been a top 10 from a different year. That's how many good games came out this year. And it looks like there are going to be even more great games coming out in 2016. So I hope y'all are all excited. It's going to be another great year for gaming. Especially when you're hanging out with 4Player Network.